Good morning. Hi, John Ciacchio, your host, and it's the Private Eye Nightline show you're listening to. I'd like to welcome all our listeners today. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We have Debbie O'Hara from the Accredited Investigations. She's Director of Investigations for Accredited, and we're going to hear from her today. We also have Rochelle Spinelli with us. She is a criminal private investigator, also from Accredited Investigations. And what we're going to do today is basically we're going to talk about some of the cases that we've worked on in the past, share with the listeners today about how those cases affected the clients and what the investigation and how it affected the different type of exposures the clients had to deal with. Today is going to be, last week we did more about infidelity issues and so forth. Today it's going to be a mixture. It's going to be basically a show about all the different aspects how a private investigator can help individuals. It's going to be basically geared towards family matters. It's going to be issues and exposures involving children and adults. And we're going to talk about the different type of exposures that kids have to deal with today, and even adults. So it's going to be what I call sensitive issues involving families today, and those families, it's going to be everything from the kids with drugs, alcohol, bullying, sexual issues, adults to depression, to the different vices also being drugs and alcohol. So again, I want to introduce Debbie. Hi Debbie, how are you today?
Hi John, good, how are you?
Good, thanks for being with us today. And Rochelle, you're in the studio today. I want to thank you for joining us as well.
It's nice to be here.
We're going to start with Rochelle today. And basically, Rochelle, if you can, you're a private investigator, but your forte, your expertise is dealing with criminal defense. And you've had, I know my dealings with you for many years now. You've represented clients from children to adults. Why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a private investigator?
I have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in criminal justice. I started out working undercover as an investigator, and about 10 years ago I started focusing on mainly criminal defense.
Is there a big demand for private investigators when it comes to criminal defense work?
Yes, there actually is. A lot of attorneys need the investigation in order to make their case, whether the client is guilty of some charges or is not. They need to know, and they need to know the extent of the damages.
Okay. When you say the type of criminal defense work and everything, that's actually working for attorneys who are representing their clients.
Yes, it is.
Do you have much client interaction?
I have a lot of client interaction.
Okay, and let's talk about children. Okay, can you give us or the listeners some ideas, of what kind of cases you worked on?
Sure. Over the last 10 years, it was actually surprising to me that sex cases became really prevalent among 13-year-olds, especially about 10 years ago. And what was frightening about it was that these 13-year-olds don't have a concept of consequences of their actions, whether it be a child who does make sexual advances towards another child or one that makes false accusations.
Yeah, I've worked on several of those cases myself in over my career, and I find that where kids are still immature and have exposures, they're not equipped to handle with the sexual contacts, in their circle of friends or in their neighborhood. And I've seen it where kids that are left alone, their parents are working, and the kids are on their own till 5, 6 o'clock till the parents get home. Some of those kids can get in trouble, and what they're exposed to. When you say the sexual contact of kids. Have you ever done cases where there were kids that were being prosecuted as a juvenile or anything?
Absolutely. And that's what's truly scary, having teens of my own, is that as young as 13, they certainly can be charged. And I've had quite a few 13-year-olds who have been prosecuted. As you know, an example was one that, in the end, it turned out that, he didn't make the advances that, he was said to have. However, the family, in having to go through the preliminary hearing and the trial, took a second mortgage on their home and lost it, trying to defend their son.
Wow. Yeah, I can tell you, I know all three of us are parents there. We kid about it in my household, but I have a quick statement from my kids. Every time that I suspect they're up to something that they shouldn't be, I threaten them with polygraph just to get to the truth. And that usually works. But kids today, not only as investigators, but as parents, what they're exposed to today is nowhere. They're exposed to so much more than what we were as kids. And I'm sure, I know I did get in trouble as a kid, but today what they have to deal with the internet and all the different social networks out there and everything, is what they're exposed to. Is it makes a parent, you have to sit vigilant and really monitor and be involved with those kids, or it's just one thing that could get them sidetracked.
I know I watch my children with the internet and cell phones. I'm sure they really don't appreciate it, but I watch them extremely carefully because of what I've seen.
Well, with Debbie, let me ask Deb, I know with Accredited, we've had some really interesting cases where, and maybe Rochelle, you can chime in on this as well, where kids were being bullied, over the internet, at school, and so forth. This is, one of the things that I believe is fresh out there in our communities, in the schools, and in the families. And unfortunately, it's been my experience anyway that it's the parents that are last to know, and that's the frightening thing. I've seen it where kids with their insecurities develop some serious setbacks, whether it be some psychological issues, whether it be eating disorders, whether it be from pulling their hair out to cutting themselves. Devastating issues, and a lot of it has to those insecurities and the psychological issues start in the communities, in the schools, and the parents aren't quick to pick up on this kind of thing. Debbie, let's talk about adults for a little bit, okay? And we're gonna talk about children and adults throughout the whole show. But Debbie, in family issues, let's give the listeners some ideas. Most people think private investigator is to go out and catch a spouse cheating, but there's so much more that a private investigator can help in a family. Can you share with the listeners what some of those services may be able to be offered that individuals have no idea how a private investigator could help in a family situation?
Well, if you're talking about children, we've had clients call and want to follow the child to see if the child's actually involved in drugs, to also see who they're hanging around with, because they notice a change in the child's demeanor. And the same thing on the computer. And peer pressure is a lot worse today than it was years ago.
That's a good point.
So they really want to follow the child, see what they're doing. The child says they're going to work, sometimes they're not. They're going hanging with their friends, they're doing drugs, and if they just see a complete change in the child, and they want to know exactly what's going on until the child gets home.
That's putting surveillance on your own child. That's a very aggressive move. I'm sure parents or listeners are listening to us and say, wow, putting your child under surveillance. But with the type of drugs and exposures out there, I believe that you have to, when you suspect and you're not getting the truth and you have know where to turn. You need to find out what your child's doing.
Yes, yes, and that sometimes is the best way to do it.
Say without surveillance, when you say on the computer, what can be done to monitor your child's behavior on the computer?
Well, if the child's underage, there's a program that you can put on the computer where she monitors her children's activity.
Okay, and yeah, I believe there's many different programs that are put out there on the internet that customers can buy and very cost effective. But say the damage is already done, okay, and say you don't have a keystroke recording program or spyware on the computer. What's another way to learn what your child's done on the computer? Probably it's like our guest from last week was talking about, Michael Mancuso from Searching for the Truth, about doing hard drives.
Oh, doing it, yeah, actually copying the hard drive to find out what's going on.
I think a lot of parents would be very, very surprised that, their children who are good kids, who've always had good grades, and, there's no reason from the outside to believe that they would really be involved in something. You would really be surprised when you see their interactions with other people over the internet, what
The
kind
kids
of
are very
trouble they can get
naive.
into. Yes, they're
Yeah.
very naive.
Meeting up with adults, you find that quite often, or meeting with somebody they think is their own age, and it could be somebody else, and it could be, if it's a female, they could be bringing them into prostitution. You don't know what these
Or even
kids are up
internet
to.
bullying, things like that are even closer to home.
Yeah.
prevalent.
Yeah.
This is some really good topics we're discussing now. What we're going to do is we're going to break for commercial in a minute here, and then when we come back, we're going to pick up right where we left off, because there's so much exposure to kids today. So what we're going to do is take a break. Again, my name's John Ciancio, and you are listening to the Private Eye Nightline. I want to thank the listeners, and stay tuned. We'll be back shortly.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated offers a wide array of investigative services to law firms, insurance companies, individuals, private organizations, and corporations. Our goal is to reach the case objectives and resolve the client's issues as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. Local investigative services include identity, wrongful death, drug, alcohol, and abuse, and divorce, support, custody, and family investigations. For more information, call or click today. Accredited Investigations, when you need to know.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated. Professional, licensed private detectives with over 28 years of experience, providing comprehensive nationwide services. Our extensive and diverse team offers discreet and confidential consultations. Our state-of-the-art technology and investigative resources allow us to stay in front of other investigative companies. We welcome the opportunity to earn your trust and deliver you the best service in the industry. Call Accredited Investigations Incorporated at 866-821-5258.
You're listening to the Private Eye Nightline with host John Ciaccio. To ask a question or express a concern about today's program, please call toll-free 1-866-472-5788, 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to info@pinightline.com. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you to the listeners for standing by. Again, this is the Private Eye Nightline. I am your host, John Ciancio. I have with me today in the studio Debbie O'Hara, Director of Investigations for Accredited Investigations, and Rochelle Spinelli, a criminal private investigator, also in the studio today. Right before break, we were touching on some hot issues that are affecting families and children today. Debbie, can you give us some more examples as far as what what type of cases you've worked on, whether it be adults or children that are outside the norm, whether it be a child custody case or an infidelity or so forth. But What are some of the other type of cases that you worked on that could show problems inside the families? Are you know, whether it be, you know, psychological issues or kids on drugs or so forth? Can you share with us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, if you suspect your child is doing drugs, we can also, the one thing that we do here, we can do forensic testing. You can get a sample of the child's hair from the hairbrush, send it out, see if there's any drugs in the system. The other way is doing surveillance, following to see who they're meeting, what they're doing, if they're buying drugs. Also, you could do the hard drive analysis, you know, see who they're emailing back and forth, and you get a little information from that, as well as their mobile phones. The mobile phones is basically where they do all their information today. I'd say more than the computer because they're always with it.
Yeah, I see that with my two sons, you know, they're 24/7. Rochelle, maybe you can educate us to some of the criminal things the kids are getting in trouble with on their cell phones or the internet.
It's amazing, you know, we give our children cell phones when they're, you know, 11, 12 years old, some are younger. I think parents, you know, we grew up in a time where it was much more innocent, and we don't think about the trouble that they can get into. Virtually every phone these days has a camera, and one of the things that kids get in trouble with is that girls will take a picture of themselves, you know, without a shirt on. We'll send it to a friend who will then pass it on. That's child pornography. And they will arrest a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, you know, 14. It doesn't matter. And I don't think kids understand that that's what it is, and it really is a very, very serious matter.
I think not only do the kids do not understand, but I don't think the parents understand and it's usually the aftermath, the damage, you know, the child is expelled from school or the child is arrested, and because some girl had a request from her boyfriend or wannabe boyfriend to send a picture of her in a compromising situation, and that's where it all starts.
I think that you know, for parents, I'm actually very surprised that more parents don't take their phones, the kids' phones, at night. I know I do. My kids think I'm mean, but you know, at a certain time of night, I don't believe that, you know, it's necessary for them to be contacting people, and I don't want them to have others, you know, contacting them, you know, getting involved in situations that wouldn't be good for them. And I hear, of course, from my children that all of their friends are, you know, they're on the phone late at night, they, you know, under the covers with their phone, and I couldn't sleep at night knowing what happens if I didn't take their phones.
Yeah, I don't know about most parents. I know with me, it's the first thing that, hey, you know, I tell my sons, you know, that as easy as you got that phone, it can be taken away just as easy. You know, it's a point where I think they need to show maturity when they're using that phone, to what they're saying and who they're saying it to and what pictures they're taking and they're sending it to. And then also the internet. And we've done all kind of cases where kids have gotten in trouble on the internet. And you're right, Debbie, that's probably, that phone is more used than the computer.
Yes.
And we documented some kids in trouble. I've known that. I've seen it with the type of work we've done and everything. I remember chasing children and young adults clearly across this country. I remember from the kids getting hooked up on the internet, thinking that their friends they're empowered to a point where you know, some of these kids got involved with the wrong crowd, and I've had to go all over this country, Las Vegas, Florida, you name it, to find these kids and bring them back. And usually it's tied to you know, some other ugly behavior, whether it be drugs or getting involved with the wrong people, who influence them. Maybe you ladies have some more of those kind of stories or exposures that these kids are being confronted with. I remember you did a job up in was it Rhode Island?
Yes. And we've had several cases that have been in either New England, Illinois, that involved kids. The one in Rhode Island involved one who was technically an adult. However, the parents started noticing changes in behavior, whether it be, contacting them, various issues, and they were concerned enough to do a lot of surveillance. It turned out that the child was doing drugs, possibly dealing, and the parents asked us to intervene and convince the daughter to come back and enter drug rehab.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I've worked on a lot of those cases. Usually, that's what you try to do, is you try to do some type of intervention program with them to wherever they got sidetracked, to get them back on the right track. And usually, as private investigators, we're only equipped to do so much. It's sometimes you need to bring other professionals in, whether it be therapy, counseling, drug intervention, those, because it's not a quick fix.
Well, we're also, private investigators are experienced in this area, and it does help to have somebody who is not the parent try to talk some sense into an adult, because frankly, you can't force an adult to do anything, to go into rehab, to stop their lifestyle. So hiring a private investigator enabled us to speak with these various clients and really show them what they were doing wrong, how they could change their lives, how worried their parents were, and actually get them to come willingly.
Debbie, I'm sure you've probably had a lot of cases involving children, young adults, where parents just the need to know was paramount, but to understand the behavior of those kids and young adults and finding out and tracking was a lot of them tied to being involved with the wrong person, like girls on the internet, or being involved with different guys, or getting in trouble. Maybe you can shed some more light on that as far as
Facebook is like the #1 culprit, and children are posting everything up there. They're posting their home phone numbers, their cell numbers, their addresses. And there's an article I read not too long ago, and then they tell people on Facebook, oh, we're going on vacation. And that's a perfect opening right there for somebody that wants to rob the house. That is very rampant with that. They're posting everything up there.
Yeah, and before Facebook, it was MySpace. It was
I think Facebook is a lot worse than MySpace. Everything, pictures, nude pictures, semi-nude pictures, everything they're posting. That's their intimate journal.
Yeah, and they even talk about their experiences of getting high and doing different drugs and alcohol and everything. And I know my sons have Facebook accounts. I don't monitor it, and I give them some freedom there and so forth. But sometimes you just don't know. But it's a forum where young adults and children are very comfortable sharing that information with their friends in their inner circle. Mm-hmm. And it could lead to trouble if they're communicating with the wrong people. Rochelle, on the criminal side, what's some other cases that you've gotten involved in as far as with juveniles and young adults? And it not necessarily has to be internet or so forth, but do you have any some more examples?
I think people probably tend to assume that if a child gets involved in a criminal case, that it's often something pretty minor. But I've had a lot of cases where kidnapping was the charge, and I've had cases from both angles where an older child, I believe over 18, made an accusation. A spurned girlfriend. And I don't think they really truly understand when they're making the accusations. I don't believe that they necessarily purposely lie about it and try to create this problem. However, again, they don't realize what they're doing, and suddenly the ex-boyfriend is charged with kidnapping. Obviously a very, very serious charge. And, it turned out in the end that, there were quite a few witnesses who could corroborate that this was not a kidnapping. But that family, again, had to go through the entire trial system, and that can take 4 to 6 months. And it's very stressful, and it's very costly.
We're going to stay on that one. Again, they're telling me we're going to have to take a break here for in a little bit, but it's interesting. I think we'll talk about that more, of what the kids put the parents through as well, because
Absolutely.
I know, Rochelle, I've seen firsthand some of the cases you dealt with, young adults and kids who were bullying that turned into road rage, hitting
Aggravated
somebody
assault.
with a car. Another case you did where one girl stabbed another girl. I mean, this is wild times for parents.
And these are not, kids that you would typically think would get involved in these situations. They were good kids.
Okay.
But they do get involved.
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do is we're going to go to break here. Again, you've been listening to the Private Eye Nightline. My name is John Ciacchio. I am your host. And again, with Debbie O'Hara and Rochelle Spinelli, when we return. All right, thank you.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated offers a wide array of investigative services to law firms, insurance companies, individuals, private organizations, and corporations. Our goal is to reach the case objectives and resolve the client's issues as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. Local investigative services include identity, wrongful death, drug, alcohol, and abuse, and divorce, support, custody, and family investigations. For more information, call or click today. Accredited Investigations, when you need to know.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated. Professional, licensed private detectives with over 28 years of experience, providing comprehensive nationwide services. Our extensive and diverse team offers discreet and confidential consultations. Our state-of-the-art technology and investigative resources allow us to stay in front of other investigative companies. We welcome the opportunity to earn your trust and deliver you the best service in the industry. Call Accredited Investigations Incorporated at 866-821-5258.
You're listening to the Private Eye Nightline with host John Ciacchio. To ask a question or express a concern about today's program, please call toll-free 1-866-472-5788, 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to info@pinightline.com. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you everybody for standing by. Again, John Ciacchio, the Private Eye Nightline, and Debbie O'Hara from Accredited Investigations, along with the criminal private investigator Rochelle Spinelli, also from Accredited Investigations. All right, right prior to break, we were talking about some serious issues, and Rochelle, I want to come back to some of those. I've seen some of the cases, that you were dealing with, and some really got out of control. I mean, I think there was one case with the bullying turned into a road rage. Tell us a little bit more about that and some of the other ones.
Well, I think, part of the problem is that with the bullying, I don't know that the laws have necessarily caught up with the way kids are today. And in that particular case, there was an incredible amount of documentation about various, bullying issues at school and the police reports. And unfortunately, I guess the way, the laws are right now, the police weren't really inclined to do anything, or it was a sort of he said, she said type of incident. And finally, it blew over, and, there was an aggravated assault charge against a 17-year-old girl because when she was trying to escape a situation, she ended up hitting her bully with a car.
Wow. If I remember our case, the bullying lasted for years.
Yes, it did. It was at least 4 or 5 years of constant bullying. It was the police knew the girls involved very well.
Yeah, there was a lot of police reports. Police were called a lot of times. I mean, the school was involved, but it just goes to show you, the long-term effect of being bullied and how people could just snap.
Absolutely.
To a point where, and that's where I think today the kids they're not mature enough to deal with it. I think even as young adults or grown-ups, if you're not used to that environment or dealing with that day in and day out, how can you be equipped to handle emotionally? It's a lot to go through, and at such a young age, I think it just wears on it, and I think parents need to look at for seeing more of those signs. And we were talking with Debbie earlier about what the things you can do. I want to go back to the cell phones because you're right. Debbie, you said to our listeners that that's the number one communication tool out there for kids. What can be learned? On a computer, I know you can do a hard drive and everything. What can you do to a cell phone, and what can you learn from it?
Well, on the cell phone, the main thing, which is the way most children communicate today, very seldom will they pick up a phone and talk to a friend. Text messaging. You can retrieve, we just did one not too long ago, and we retrieved thousands of text messages. Even though the child is deleting them to hide them from their parents or whoever, they are still in that phone somewhere.
Wow. So text messages, if you do what's a forensic hard drive on a cell phone, you'll be able to obtain the text messages. How about pictures?
Oh, photos as well. Photos, and at times we're able to tell if the photograph was taken from that particular cell phone, or if it's from the internet, or if it was sent from someone else.
So photos, we call them JPEGs. Correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, with what you just said. Looking at the photograph and looking at the way it was sent to that cell phone or sent from that cell phone will tell the examiner a lot to understand it. If it was commercially graded photograph that was downloaded off the internet, or if it was homegrown.
Right.
And that will tell you a lot, and will tell the parents a lot, especially what the kids are doing with their phones.
Definitely. But you really have to keep an eye on your children today and just watch the behavior. Anytime you sense any change in behavior, be on the alert and be looking.
What other things from a cell phone? You can get text messages, you can get pictures.
Emails, any emails that they were sending back and forth. You can get a list of the contacts of the people that they keep in contact with as well.
All right, so earlier you said, the parents, if they suspect drugs, they can do what forensic labs to test.
Do that.
To see if there's, for any drug use. You can do a forensic hard drive on a computer to determine, communications and what they're accessing over the internet. You can do a cell phone forensic
Correct.
analysis to get text messages, to get photographs, websites, emails, everything.
Yes.
I think one thing I'd like to remind parents too is that you know your child best, and if you suspect there's a change in their behavior, don't ignore it. It can't hurt. It cannot hurt to do any of these, whether you check hard drives or the cell phone. It really can't hurt, and so many times when that parent has that feeling, they're correct.
Yes.
Yeah, but ladies, I got to tell you, I've been an investigator going on almost 29 years now. And where do you draw the line when it comes to kids and young adults, whether it be privacy or, not to pierce that trust and that that relationship you have with your children, and even when they become young adults. Where do you draw that line?
Well, if there's a dramatic change in their behavior, that's where I'm drawing the line.
I don't think trust for a teenager is paramount over their safety. And frankly, if you're a minor and your parents, sees a lot of changes, I don't think that privacy should be an issue. Your child might, kick and scream and say, that's my privacy, or I should be able to do what I want. However, you are trying to make sure they're safe.
They don't know
And
the consequences.
you know what can happen now and in the future based on what they're doing, and they don't.
Yeah, I have to tell you, seeing firsthand what these kids and these young adults are exposed to, I would not have a problem. I mean, I'd rather be called on the carpet on trust issues or spying on my kids than having the worst, being whether they be subjected to a criminal element or a drug addiction or anything. I think
I think too, you have to remember that it's not the child's right to have access to the internet or to have a cell phone other than maybe for school. So, I told my children up front that there is a possibility at some point that I could check. So they're aware of it, and I do it so very infrequently. And again, when I see behavior that I think is a little different. But I did make them aware up front that that was something that I could and would do to protect them.
Yeah, as parenting, I would call it a proactive approach. Is basically educating them up front that to keep them inside their boundaries. Okay, and we all have boundaries in life, and I think with kids, it's more challenging for them to stay inside those boundaries, especially when they're given access or exposure to so many things. If they're not mature enough to handle, they can
Well, I
certainly.
think when we were growing up, we had boundaries just based on, how many people or how far could you really talk to somebody on the phone. Today, frankly, those kids don't have boundaries. With the internet and a cell phone, you can, talk to anybody around the world at any time of day or night. So they don't have boundaries and they need them.
Yeah, and I can tell you, we've seen it, an insecure 14 or 15-year-old girl is out on the internet, and all of a sudden she's being told wonderful things by this individual on the other end, whether it be a computer or cell phone or wherever, and you don't know. This guy could be a 45-year-old pedophile.
We have to remember too that sometimes those kids actually do know that that is an adult, that he is 45. I've had cases where kids have contacted an adult who used to be involved with the family, so they were well aware that they were an adult. However, they got into situations where there was statutory rape. The girl thought she could handle the situation, but when they're under, I think it's 16 in most states, the law considers them not capable of making that decision to get involved sexually with an adult.
That I'm telling you, as a parent and as an investigator, just those kind of situations just they ring true to a parent to say, hey, wake up, monitor your kids. And you're right, with boundaries aside, the need to know is paramount, and whatever you have to do when it comes to children to keep them safe and keep their environment safe, and what the communications that they have access to is important.
One thing I would like to touch on that you earlier you had talked about how children are often home alone for a few hours in the afternoon, but I would say to parents, don't even believe that's the only time it's happening. Text messaging is usually it's silent. You could be home. They could be in the same room with you. They could be in the next room. And because they're texting and emailing over their phone, you have no idea what they're doing. So you don't even have to not be home for this to happen.
That's a good point. We've seen that firsthand with infidelity issues as well. And we discussed that on the past shows. All right, they're telling me we got to go for another break here. So listeners, I'm going to ask you to stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Again, it's the Private Eye Nightline. I'm your host, John Ciacchio. Debbie O'Hara and Rochelle Spinelli from Accredited Investigations also in the studio. So we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated offers a wide array of investigative services to law firms, insurance companies, individuals, private organizations, and corporations. Our goal is to reach the case objectives and resolve the client's issues as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. Local investigative services include identity, wrongful death, drug, alcohol, and abuse, and divorce, support, custody, and family investigations. For more information, call or click today. Accredited Investigations, when you need to know.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated. Professional, licensed private detectives with over 28 years of experience, providing comprehensive nationwide services. Our extensive and diverse team offers discreet and confidential consultations. Our state-of-the-art technology and investigative resources allow us to stay in front of other investigative companies. We welcome the opportunity to earn your trust and deliver you the best service in the industry. Call Accredited Investigations Incorporated at 866-821-5258.
You're listening to the Private Eye Nightline with host John Ciacchio. To ask a question or express a concern about today's program, please call toll-free 1-866-472-5788, 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to info@pinightline.com. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you to our listeners again for standing by. John Ciacchio from the Private Eye Nightline. All right, this is our last segment, so what we're going to do is go right back into what we were discussing about. Rochelle, when we were talking prior to break on some of this stuff with these kids getting in trouble, for criminal charges and so forth, you're telling us and the listeners about the exposures the parents have. Why don't you give them more insight to what the criminal court system's like and how expensive it could be?
Absolutely. The newest trend that I've sort of noticed in the last couple of years that I've been dealing with are cases where teenagers make an accusation against a parent who is disciplining them, and I don't mean physically. And teens, of course, will blow up, exaggerate. They really think that they know what they should be able to do. And in the end, I've had parents who were literally charged with kidnapping, assault, and in the two cases that I just was mentioning, the parents eventually were found not guilty. And in both cases, actually, the teen, after several months of thinking about it, truly did understand that their parent was just trying to discipline them. One had failed some classes in school, so her laptop was taken away. She was forced to go to summer school, and she just thought her mother was the worst person for taking away her communication with her friends. And actually, her mother didn't assault her; she assaulted her mother. However, that family did fork over tens of thousands of dollars in order to have a good criminal defense.
So, and legal fees and so forth, and that's where the court system is coming after the parents, or in other cases where a juvenile is charged with a criminal charge for whatever it be. The parents are exposed financially, whether it be to fight for themselves or for their children.
And they're exposed criminally.
Yes.
I mean, kids really truly don't understand what they're doing, and so far I have not really found any cases where the parent really truly was being abusive. These are cases where in the end they were found not guilty, but in the meantime the parent had to move out of the home so that the child could live there without their their victim considered by the court. So they don't have to live with that person who supposedly abused them. So it can be financially draining depending on where they have to live. There are a lot of changes.
What kind of costs are involved when you have to hire a criminal defense attorney for your children or for yourself? How expensive could it be?
I believe easily over $10,000, and I believe some of the cases that we've dealt with, I believe it's been as much as $30,000 or $40,000.
Yeah, I've seen several cases I've worked on too that could get up there, and I've seen people mortgage and second mortgage their homes. It's a devastating effect on a family.
It's an emotional issue too, because I find that fortunately 99% of the people that I deal with in criminal cases have never been in trouble before, so they're not aware of what's going to happen. They have to continue to work and live and function a normal life with this huge weight behind them, and they don't know what to do. And I think one of those things that I would always tell people is it's a big financial burden. People don't usually have that kind of cash sitting around in case they need a criminal attorney. However, the mistake people make is that they will hire an attorney they think they can afford, who is not solely a criminal attorney, and that's a big mistake. I think you hire the very best and you find a way. Whether you have to borrow from family, you do what you do, but you need to have a really, really good criminal attorney.
Yeah, I see that all the time in our industry, working for different clients on a lot of different issues, but sometimes making the wrong mistake when you pick an attorney. A real estate attorney should not do your divorce. Your divorce attorney should not represent you criminally.
A lot of attorneys they'll advertise that they do 5-6 different kinds of law, and in my opinion, if it's criminal, it should be criminal. You really can't go with an attorney who is not extremely well versed.
Michelle, how did you go about proving the case?
In which,
Like where the child accused the parents of abuse, how would you go about solving that one?
typically, depending on it, every case is different, but a lot of cases actually have witnesses, and it does not mean that there's a person that saw the actual kidnapping. However, there are people that have been around the parent or the child before. Mm-hmm. One might be there during, and one might be there after. There are conversations that people have. You might see somebody right after an incident supposedly happened, and you're a witness if you see their reaction, the way they were acting. A lot of times, cases are won on the fact that these witnesses, you put it together like a puzzle, and you can see that what somebody was accused of didn't happen.
Yeah, I think it's important for our listeners to know that, especially on criminal charges, the state and the county and municipality have an obligation to bring these charges forward. Not necessarily, and we've seen it firsthand, that everybody that gets charged with a criminal offense is guilty. But it's a long, drawn-out process that you have to go through to prove that innocence. I know, as Rochelle said, it's not only financially draining, but emotionally draining as well, because, and again, we're not talking hardcore criminals. We're talking people that have never had a brush with the law.
These are literally average people. They're just like we are, and their kids are, they're good kids, and they get into a lot of trouble.
And they're naive, and that one conflict could snowball or rocket into a major devastating a conflict that is long term, that it takes months, and we've seen it years sometimes for it to be resolved. And sometimes that damage is done, and it's done to a point where it's for some families I've seen firsthand couldn't go back and repair that. It was just too devastating. Sometimes those bridges get burned, and you can't cross back over. I know psychologically, and a lot of this, if we talk about parents and children, and a lot of it is emotional issues, and if the children aren't mature enough, or even with young adults and parents, sometimes it could be psychological issues. Debbie, I know in over our careers, we've seen firsthand where parents will hire us because the behavior has changed in their children, but a lot of times it's psychological, whether they want to just be separate from their parents and the parents can't understand it. Could you tell us a little bit more about, I'm sure, you can let the listeners know on some of the young adults and teenagers that we had to look at for surveillance, which is, could be an aggressive move, but a warranted move as well.
Yeah, some kids get into a depression and they just want to be by themselves. Me as a parent myself, my daughter sat and locked herself in her room, didn't get involved in family activities, just basically wanting to be by themselves. That doesn't mean that, they're on drugs or they're involved in anything, wrong.
Yeah,
It
it's
just
very
could be a phase that they're going through. Every kid goes through a certain phase.
And that's usually, I've seen with my own kids, they rather be by themselves or with their friends than be with their parents or, But a lot of times we've seen where kids have warranted doing surveillance, and we've seen where their involvement with drugs, the wrong people, hanging out with the wrong people, and so forth. And psychologically, where there's depression, it could be started from insecurities, bullying. There could be a onslaught of different exposures there.
John, you had a case a few years back where an adult child had cancer, met a woman online, and because of his sort of altered mental state, traveled several states away and lost contact with the parents, who were extremely concerned that he was foregoing his cancer treatments and that this woman had sort of control over what he was doing, and you got involved.
Yeah, that was a really good case. I'm glad we were able to help the clients. It was an intervention. We went, interrupted, their son was an adult, and we were able to talk to him and reason with him why to come back from, from the other state and come back home. And that was a really good way we were able to interact with the clients and their son and bridge back those issues. All right, well, again, we're at the end here for our show. I want to thank Debbie O'Hara and Rochelle Spinelli from Accredited Investigations joining us. Accredited Investigations is our sponsor for the show. My name's John Ciancio, your host for the Private Eye Nightline. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay. Listeners, we'll see you next week, okay? On Friday, 7 a.m. Pacific Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you next week. My name's John Ciancio, and I am your host for the Private Eye Nightline.
Thanks again for joining us this week. The Private Eye Nightline will be back next Friday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel. John Ciacchio hopes to have you tune in again next week.